So my granddaughter, everybody. It doesn't take much. No taking. I already got all these impediments right here. I'm not taking chances. Are we going to be able to ask questions? I just want to know why. Did Sherry go to? Like, yeah. She's twice. Wow. Any back problems? Yeah, it's all sorted. Oh, he's still young, right? Good for you. Did you see the waves? They look like hard sheets. I guess maybe short. Atherton sheet. All right, Martha.
Okay, good evening. It is 7 o'clock and it's time for our town hall to start. First of all, we'd like to thank Jean for being so diligent with our freezer. She even retrieves people who are down the street to come out. I don't know where they are. But anyway, we have some birthday babies in the audience. Today's is Mitsu Asuoka's birthday. Where are you? And then further on the week, we have Hideichi Nakawatase. And we have Ann Andrews. I know she's here. Yay! And then we have Bertha Glassman. Wow, we have a lot of babies here. Annette Arizmendez, Sadako Yamamoto. These are all the tongue-twisting babies. This is Tomoe Kawasaki. We have Joy Forgatch. And Wee-chan Ritnamet. But we have Mrs. Ritnamet here. So I propose we sing Happy Birthday.
Yes.
Shall we?
Yes.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, God bless birthday. We sing to you, Raylene. So, onto the program. Tonight we have somebody who is a musician who plays all kinds of instruments. This person is also an English language pun artiste. He is also a dog and cat sitter extraordinaire. In fact, I hear that the dogs and cats don't want to go home when the owners are back. They would rather stay with this person. He is also a playwright and even a pastor. So let me present to you John E.B.
Thank you. And you can tell I'm here for a special program because I'm actually wearing shoes. I had to wear my boots that we hike in. So it's fun. One of our grandkids called and said, Grandpa, can we go backpacking? And I've backpacked a lot with my son. And so I said, yes. And so Alex said, I said, where do you want to go? And Alex said, I want to go to Catalina. So I think after Alex checked it out, Catalina was not available. So Alex picked the Santa Cruz Island. I didn't know anything about Santa Cruz Island other than it's an island off of Ventura. If you go off the coast of Ventura, about 25 miles. And so I didn't know anything about it. So I got to looking at information on the computer and different things and found out it was fascinating, the history of Santa Cruz Island. And so I really got fascinated with that. So I'll share bits of that as we go along, but let's get this slideshow going here. So I'll show you a couple slides, and then if everything works out right, there's a video in here that'll tell us part of the story. The interesting thing about Santa Cruz Island is that this part of the island is owned by the National Park Service, and this part of the island is the Nature Conservancy. And what they did from about 1850 to 1960 or 1970, there was families that ranched this whole island. And so the Conservancy bought this portion and part of this portion, and the National Park Service bought part of this portion. So they agreed to share the operation of the island and the restoration of the island. And so the Nature Conservancy donated their part of this end of it to the National Park Service. And what they have sought to do is to try to restore this back to it the way it was before there was ranching. Because when they were ranching on here, they had as much as 100,000 sheep on the island, and also pigs. And so you can imagine what sheep and pigs would do to an island. Now, the beautiful part of it, along with the restoration they have done, now get this, they didn't buy this until 1970. That means that they've only owned, this has only been in public usage and public ownership for the last 50 years. But since 2006 was when they really started the effort to restore it. And so this is what blew my mind, is how much they've been able to restore. And if the video part of this works, they'll explain that a little bit. But the campsite that we stayed at was here at Scorpion Ranch. Everybody says, why Scorpion? Why did they name it that? And nobody knows for sure. Our grandson did see one scorpion, but it was not anywhere near where we were. So So what they've done is this, there's a fence that comes down here that divides the property, and all the backpacking and things, you can backpack from here over here. There's one trail that does that. But we landed here and we only had to backpack in about half a mile, which is just right for me at 83. You can see the kind of stuff you need to have. All of this stuff would go in my backpack, and plus food and clothing. So and that's the backpack down there. So when you get that all on, you'll see one picture of that. But it weighs about 30 to 40 pounds, and so I was glad we were only going about half a mile. So anyhow, that's a little bit about the island. Oh, the interesting thing is there's only 25 places, camping places here, and there you can camp here, and I think and that's about it. There's just this, so you really have the run of the island. Now, there are a lot of people that come in for day trips and do hiking because there's a lot of trails in this area that the National Park Service owns. And so a lot of people come over just for the day and do hiking. And it's a wonderful place, but it is rustic. The campsite where we had 25 campsites, and they did have pit toilets and had one faucet. If you camped here and hiked here, you did not have water. You had to bring your own water on the trail that comes over here. And on any of the other places, you had to have your own water. The only water was at our campsite for the people that camped there. So it's rustic camping. They do have pit toilets. Now, when the ranching was going on, they had about 7 headquarters. And one of them, of course, was here at Scorpion Ranch, and there was another one here at Smuggler's Cove, and there was another ranch house here, and there was one right here, and I think they had one right over here. But you can see the rugged area. This is all mountains through here, and it's very hilly in here too. So the sheep herding, they concentrated where people lived in the areas that was a little more accessible. I think they had a ranch house right over here too. So they concentrated that. They had to communicate with their own phone system because there was no phone system available. Now, geographically, originally, now this is west, and this is east. But originally, they feel like the island used to be this direction. But as the coast of California changed, so did the island. But the island has never been connected to the mainland. It's always been independent, separated by water. And during the ice ages, there was about, the separation was only about 4 miles. Now it's 25 miles. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so unique, because it has so many animals and plants that are unique, not just to this island, but they don't exist anywhere else in the world. The thing that Alex and I wanted to see particularly was the foxes. We heard about these cute foxes that they're only about this long. They're about maybe 60% of the size of a regular fox. And so that was the thing. We hoped we could see some of these island foxes because we both read about them and were pretty excited. Well, our excitement started before we got over there, because on the way over, we saw 5 humpback whales. And we saw at least 3 pods of dolphins, and a gorgeous sight to see these dolphins. There's about 40 dolphins in each of the pods. I think they're called pods. I know that whales are called pods, but anyhow, with the dolphins. It just, they were silver as they dove in and out of the water, and it's just a gorgeous sight. And I thought, that's worth it just to see them, even if we don't get to see any foxes. Well, we landed on the island, and we're staying at the Scorpion Ranch, and that's Alex and myself. You can see when you have all your backpack up here, that it fills up this whole part of you. You can see it stands up behind you. So, and we still have stuff in our hands. So, anyhow.
That's actually the train station.
Was that, well,
It's paved.
yeah. So, and then the next picture is when we started coming up, and all we could see from the boat was these what looked like pylons sticking out of the water. And we knew that this island was a little bit remote, but my eyes got pretty big, and I was looking and I thought, there is nothing there. This certainly isn't where we're going to stop. Well, it was the pier, and this is the pier, and this is looking from the boat into the land, and so the boat would have been right out here, and this is what it looks like from the hill just above it. And you can see there's nothing there except they had some kayaks here that they were renting out. And we would have loved to go on a kayak because we both loved to do that, except it was so cold. We had that marine layer the whole time, except for the first day, it was clear. But the rest of the time we had this marine layer and the breeze, and so we were actually cold the rest of the time we were there. Even it wasn't cold, but it sure felt cold because it was so overcast and the wind was blowing. So we decided we were not going to go out on kayaks. But the thing that makes kayaks so much fun is they take them, they beach them right here, and then you go around the island, and there are all kinds of caves on the sides of these cliffs, and that you can actually go a short distance into the caves in a kayak. And we thought that would have been great fun, but we were just not ready to be that cold. So now we're going to see a video, if this works, that is an excellent video that the National Park Service put out that tells about the history of this. This will take a second. We were trying to get sound and everything beforehand, and we were having a little trouble with it. So
what is it about an island? What is it that captures our imagination? Maybe it's that islands are a world apart. Oceanic outposts where native communities have evolved in isolation for thousands of years. Every plant and animal an integral part of a unique, self-sustaining ecosystem. What's surprising is just how vulnerable islands can be, how easily certain human activities can disturb this natural environment, and how a chain of seemingly unrelated events can undermine an ecosystem that has sustained life in balance for thousands of years. Rising up from the Pacific like a strand of floating fortresses, the Channel Islands beckons to their rugged shores. Of the 5 islands that make up Channel Islands National Park, Santa Cruz Island is the largest of these wild refuges. Only 25 miles from the mainland, a visit to Santa Cruz is like taking a step back in time to what California was like 150 years ago. Oases of biodiversity, Santa Cruz and the other islands are home to plants and animals found nowhere else on Earth. Like the Galapagos Islands of South America, The Channel Islands provide a rare opportunity for species to evolve in isolation. Over 150 species are unique to the Channel Islands, and 13 are found only on Santa Cruz Island. The island also harbors other treasures, including some of the world's most well-preserved and sacred cultural sites, which shed light on the lives of the island Chumash, Native Americans who thrived and lived sustainably on the island for thousands of years. The island's plants and animals also flourished for thousands of years. But in the mid-1800s, pigs and sheep were introduced by European settlers and eventually formed large feral populations numbering in the tens of thousands.
The presence of non-native pigs and sheep on the island had a tremendous impact on the island's vegetation. You have to remember there were literally thousands of these animals roaming the island. And through grazing and rooting, they created bare soil. And it was in these areas that the invasive plant species, the non-native species like fennel and the annual grasses, invaded and were able to outcompete the native plant species. It was a result of these impacts that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service listed 9 of the island's plant species as endangered or threatened.
The archaeological remains of the Chumash Islanders also fell prey to the non-native animals.
The non-native pigs impacted the archaeological sites in many ways, but especially through rooting down for foods. This rooting on average extended about 1 to 2 feet in depth, which is not very deep, except when you consider that a lot of these sites do not extend more than 3 to 4 feet in depth. So that resulted in about 50% of the site being impacted.
What was being lost to us as Native peoples with the destruction of the non-native animals, especially the pigs, was the sanctity of our sacred sites. The disruption and disturbance of our burials and the artifacts out on the island was very unsettling for us.
In the 1950s, the island was struck by another blow, this one from offshore.
Bald eagles were once a very important part of the Santa Cruz Island ecosystem. We believe there was at least 7 nesting pairs on Santa Cruz. Bald eagles were heavily impacted by the chemical DDT. DDT was manufactured in Southern California. It was discharged into the marine environment. It affected the entire food chain, eventually working its way up to bald eagles. Bald eagles, as a result, laid thin eggs. The eggs were crushed, and these birds weren't able to reproduce. The end result was bald eagles were totally eliminated from the Channel Islands by the mid-1900s.
This set the stage for a new inhabitant to colonize Santa Cruz Island. Golden eagles ventured over from the mainland, lured by the promise of easy prey. Unlike bald eagles who feed on marine animals, golden eagles hunt terrestrial animals.
So with the bald eagles gone, the golden eagles were able to move onto the island. They took advantage of this non-native animal, the feral pigs, that were existing on Santa Cruz Island. And they also hit the island foxes. Island foxes weren't accustomed to having an aerial predator, and they never saw the golden eagle coming.
Island foxes, a unique species found only on the Channel Islands, have long been the island's top predator, living without the threat of being hunted by other animals. But now, for the first time, the foxes had become prey, and the results were catastrophic.
Island foxes on Santa Cruz Island declined over 90% due to golden eagle predation. Between 1994, when we estimated there were about 1,500 foxes on the island, and 2000, by which time there were less than 100 left, and the population was in dire straits, almost at the verge of extinction.
For the island foxes, the bald eagles, and many other species, life on Santa Cruz Island had become unsustainable. There was little chance of the island recovering on its own. So the island's managing partners, the National Park Service and the Nature Conservancy, put together a multifaceted restoration plan built on science and long-term commitment.
One of the biggest threats is losing unique species found here and nowhere else in the world. The balance of life had been so deeply disturbed for decades that the island was simply not going to be able to right itself on its own. It was clear that if we didn't take immediate action, the the island's unique natural systems would collapse.
A plan to restore the island species and ecosystem was put into action, signaling a change from an era of island ranching to one of conservation and preservation of a national park. Island restoration efforts began in the early 1980s with a program to remove the non-native sheep. It was a first step towards turning the tides and restoring the island ecosystem.
Historically, there were over 100,000 sheep on Santa Cruz. When the National Park Service acquired the eastern portion of Santa Cruz Island, we began to round up the sheep. They were moved into corrals and then onto boats and brought here to the mainland.
After the non-native sheep were removed, the island was granted some reprieve, a chance for vegetation to regenerate, for the landscape to stabilize. But non-native pigs continued to wreak havoc on the island's cultural and biological resources, ruining sacred archaeological sites, uprooting native island vegetation, and supporting golden eagles that, in turn, would eat the island foxes.
Island foxes were brought into captivity on Santa Cruz Island, as they were on San Miguel and on Santa Rosa, because they were on the verge of extinction. Their populations were so small, and the threat of golden eagles was still so high that captivity was the only thing that was going to save them at that point. In 2002, 10 pairs of Santa Cruz Island foxes were brought into captivity to serve as the core or the nucleus of a captive breeding program that would eventually attempt to repopulate the island with island foxes. Captive breeding of island foxes had never been attempted when we started it on Santa Cruz Island in 2002. And we were faced with a number of challenges. First of all, we had to get the right foxes into captivity. Luckily, there were radio-collared foxes out there in the wild, and we knew who was mated to whom, so we were able to bring in mated pairs. Now, for the foxes that we brought in that we wanted to mate with other animals, we actually studied their genetics to make sure that we weren't mating them with relatives. We also needed to come up with a proper diet for island foxes, and for that we worked with the National Zoo. We needed to come up with the right type of enclosure to keep island foxes in because of their prodigious climbing abilities. And finally, we needed to come up with an operational plan that would take us well on the road towards recovery of the wild population by gradually releasing foxes from captivity over a number of years, since the whole idea was to recover the population in the wild to a viable level.
But the captive-bred island foxes would have little chance of surviving in the wild if the golden eagles remained.
In order to recover island foxes, we decided it was necessary to live capture and remove golden eagles. The most successful technique that we used was the bow net. The bow net was put in the ground and hidden. We put a lure or bait in the center to attract the golden eagle. If a bird came to the net, we could remotely trigger it, safely capture a golden eagle, and we could bring it to the mainland and release it in Northern California.
By 2006, 44 golden eagles had been relocated to mainland California. But this relocation didn't guarantee the safety of the island foxes. New golden eagles would continue to be sustained on the island until the non-native pigs, their main source of food, were removed. As long as feral pigs continued to roam the island, the ecosystem would remain in jeopardy. The daunting task of removing the non-native pigs was handled by a team of experts from New Zealand with a long history of eradication projects focused on non-native and invasive species. In order to efficiently cover the island's 96 square miles, the island was divided into 5 zones, separated by fences.
When we completed the first zone, zone 1, we could actually leave that zone and walk away from it, knowing that it's complete, and prevent immigration from the other zones that bounded that. And so that was a really, really important aspect of the project. Without those, it meant that instead of having 8,000 acres to protect once you've completed it, we would have had 96 square miles of area to hunt continuously. So from that aspect, the fences were really, really important.
Even with the zoning, there was still a vast amount of terrain to cover, a task that could have taken a decade if the team had been earthbound.
Yeah, the helicopter was by far the most important tool in the eradication process. It allowed us to take at least 75% of the pigs off the island very quickly and very efficiently and cause the population to drop almost overnight.
By 2006, the last of the over 5,000 non-native pigs had been removed from the island. With the removal of the pigs, the golden eagles could no longer be sustained, opening the gates for the reintroduction of bald eagles on Santa Cruz Island.
We thought the time was finally right for reintroducing bald eagles to the Northern Channel Islands. In 2002, the Institute for Wildlife Studies established a partnership with the National Park Service to reestablish bald eagles on the California Channel Islands. Between 2002 and 2007, we released over 60 bald eagle chicks on the islands.
This is about an 8-week-old bald eagle chick. It was hatched out at the San Francisco Zoo. The zoo's been a cooperator in this whole program to bring bald eagles back to the Channel Islands, and we have a captive colony of bald eagles there that they use to produce offspring like this for reintroduction programs.
Once the birds reach about 12 weeks of age, this is the time when they would normally start flying in the wild. And they're jumping up and down inside the platform, exercising their wings, and actually hovering a little bit inside the space they have there. We know at that point it's time that they can be released. Early in the morning, before it's light, we lower down what we call the fledging door that allows them their first glimpse in the new world outside the cage. And they go out on that, and sometimes the birds are not too quick to take their first flight. It's a pretty scary event for them. Other birds, they get outside and they take off almost immediately. And what we do prior to releasing them is place a radio transmitter on the birds, and that allows us to track their movements after they leave the platform. So we can make sure that they're doing okay no matter where they go.
By 2006, the multifaceted restoration plan had begun to show results. For the first time in over 50 years, a bald eagle chick successfully hatched on Santa Cruz Island.
Eagles will typically begin to breed when they're 4 to 6 years of age. And this has actually now happened on Santa Cruz Island. In 2006, we had our first successful breeding of eagles that we released there. A bird from Santa Catalina Island was released, paired up with one of our Santa Cruz Island releases, established a nest, and successfully raised a chick. We currently have 2 breeding pairs, adult breeding pairs on the island, but we strongly suspect that in the next couple of years that number is going to increase because more of the birds are maturing and starting to pair up.
Bald eagles are among the many symbols of success in the endeavor to restore the balance of life on the island.
By all measures, the captive breeding program on Santa Cruz Island has been a remarkable success. In just 5 years, almost 100 pups were born in captivity, and almost 100 foxes were released to the wild. And these releases, combined with the removal of golden eagles, have almost assured island fox recovery on Santa Cruz Island, making this one of the most successful and quickest recovery programs in the history of endangered species.
As for the island's native plants, signs of recovery are sprouting across the island.
On the coastal terraces, we're seeing recovery of native plants like giant coreopsis, toyon, California sagebrush, and island buckwheat. And the recovery of these plants is reforming the island sagebrush community, which was once more widespread on the island prior to grazing. What's really amazing is the recovery of the native plants here in the riparian. When I first started at the park 10 years ago, none of these plants were here. And now look, many of them are over my head.
But the island's plants and animals aren't the only beneficiaries of the restored ecosystem.
With the removal of the non-native animals, and especially the pigs, we can see the restoration of the island and the protection of our sacred sites while the native plants are growing and covering and stabilizing the land. We see the preservation of our culture in terms of its physical presence, but we can also know that for future generations, our children will be able to go and see the islands in a natural way and hold on to and keep the stories of our ancestors.
Although the signs are hopeful, how do we know if this restoration effort on Santa Cruz Island has been successful
At the National Park Service, we measure the success of our efforts on how close we come to restoring the naturally functioning ecosystem of Santa Cruz Island by bringing back bald eagles, island foxes, and protecting the rare plants and animals, some of which occur nowhere else in the world. We can ensure that in the future, Santa Cruz Island is self-sustaining and requires minimum human inputs.
One of the biggest lessons that we can learn from the restoration of Santa Cruz Island is the power of nature to be able to heal itself if given a chance.
The collaborative restoration effort on Santa Cruz has yielded unprecedented results, but challenges still lie ahead.
Santa Cruz Island is still vulnerable. We have to remain vigilant. The island fox, the bald eagle, and the landscape itself are still recovering.
By establishing Santa Cruz as a national park, the island and its inhabitants now have the promise of stewardship, a promise to preserve the delicate balance of life here, now and for generations to come. So what is it about islands? What is it about Santa Cruz Island that captures our hearts? Perhaps it's that places like this remind us of wild places that we have lost, and how important it is to protect the wild places that remain.
I think you can see why I got excited about this. It's an amazing restoration process. And so this was another view of the harbor where we landed from the other side, and you can see how steep the incline is. You can see that there's a boat there near the dock at that time, and I have a few other pictures here to show if I can get this. Now this was our campsite. That's Alex. And the trees are not native. These are eucalyptus trees that when they were ranching, they planted a lot of eucalyptus in there. And if you look right behind Alex there, you see that what looks like a steel box. You always store your food in a steel box for the same reason you do in Yosemite, except a different animal. It's not the bears, it's the little foxes. And we had no trouble at all finding foxes. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they start showing up, and they're all over the place. And I was sitting here at this table one day, and a fox was roaming around. Pretty soon he jumped up on the table, and right in front of me, he was about 2 feet in front of me. And of course, I didn't have a camera out or anything, and I couldn't move. But he saw me, and he jumped down very quickly. But and so our camping facility, we had a tent. Alex had a tent set up right over here, and I like to sleep out, so I just had a tarp on the ground and threw my sleeping bag on that and slept with another tarp to pull over me if the moisture got to be too much. And I was great. Actually, it was so cold that in the evenings, Alex and I would sit at this table and play cards together. But we'd wrap a tarp around us. I had 2 flannel shirts and a windbreaker on, and I was still cold. And so we had fun just playing cards. But we were anxious to go to bed because our sleeping bags are good sleeping bags. This thing, yeah, you could sleep at freezing temperature, and that would be fine. I would take that out for you to show you, but because that's a regular size sleeping bag, it's down, so you can pack it in a small container, which you need to do if you're backpacking. And let's see. there's two foxes. It's kind of hard to see them. This one was right there. I don't know what they were doing. They're playing or something, but they were all over the place. Anyhow, the funny thing was, they of course don't want you to feed the foxes, and we're very conscientious about that. But I got to admit, it was awfully tempting because they are so darling. They're just darling little things, and your heart goes, feed them, feed them, feed them, and your mind says no, no, no. So we didn't. But on one of our hikes, we had we didn't take all this stuff when we went on hiking. We had little bag, not backpacks, but little knapsacks that we took just our snacks in when we went on the hikes. So we went on one hike and I put some lunch things in and put some tortillas and incidentally, I found this was a wonderful thing. Easy to pack tortillas, and a little pack like this is pink salmon, and it's really good, but it's easy to pack and doesn't weigh much. And so I had those things in, but the tortillas didn't fit in the little pouch in the knapsack like the rest of my snacks did. So I had the snacks in this pack. So when we got back, I took off my knapsack and pulled all that stuff off and put it in the steel container. I forgot the tortillas. Alex was sitting out nearby, and suddenly there was a noise, and I had laid down to take a nap. I take a lot of those, and I was taking a nap, and the fox jumped up on the table, ran over to my knapsack, and grabbed my tortillas, which was not almost a full package, and was running off with them. And Alex went off to chase him, and couldn't retrieve that. But anyhow, we knew we had violated the rules, but honestly, we weren't too unhappy. Those foxes are so darling. So then this, you can see from this is one of the hikes we took. What our destination was right here. You can see the road right here. So we were going winding around, and eventually dropped down into this canyon and ended up at this beach over here. I think this was the longest hike. It was 7 miles, and we went on, most of them were about 2 miles. They weren't too long. And that was just right for me, frankly. At my age, I love this stick, because what I do when I'm hiking, I keep this stick on the downhill side, wherever the downhill side is, because I can get the grip and maintain my balance with this stick. And then I use this stick on the uphill side. And I've done that in the high Sierras, and I was doing it, very glad for this, because we found some of the trails were kind of rocky and kind of slippery, and so it's very, very nice to have something like this that I could support myself with. So that thing has been a lot of backpacking trips with me, and I'm really glad to have it. So you can see the trails were all clearly defined, and they want you to stay on the trails, and that's a good thing to do, because, and here's some of the things that you see, just these beautiful flowers. And we were there at a good time of the year, so we got to see some real beautiful flowers along the way. Now, one of the other things about the island is, and it was fascinating, we were on one of the hikes and I found chunks of lava. And I thought, lava? And it surprised me. What you see here is diatomaceous earth, and in the bottoms of the ancient seas, that's where the seashells collect, and they formulate this diatomaceous earth, which I'm very familiar with, because they had a diatomaceous earth mine in Lompoc, in one of the one of the communities we serve, Johns Manville, Mind It, and they sell that. And so, you really had three different types of geography on that small island. You had lava, you had areas where the diatomaceous earth was dominant, and then the hills were shale. We did not try to go up those hills because I knew my legs wouldn't be able to stay that, and it wouldn't be safe for me to go and climb on shale. So we didn't do that. But it was interesting to see the different types of geography that were right there on that small island. Now, the other thing that impressed me a whole bunch was, even though the sheep and all the ranching did tremendous damage to the island, the National Park Service and the Nature Conservancy have not written that part off as bad history. They include it in the history. So they have pictures of the families, they have pictures of, and they have saved some of the ranch and restored a couple of the ranch houses. This is one of them. And this next picture is another one of the ranch houses that they've restored. And they turned one of them into the information center so you can go in and read about the history. They had the names of the families that lived there. I thought that was really neat because it would be an awful tendency to want to just write off that part of history and say, well, that was bad, you know. But they haven't done that. They have said it's a part of the history. We want to restore the island to what it was, but we're not ignoring that. And they also honor the Chumash Indians and have parts of the history. The Chumash Indians actually lived on this island for 5,000 years. And so they have honored them as well. So it's really wonderful. They've not written off parts of the history. They've included that. And one of the things that I really liked was this next thing they have done. Now, they have a lot of equipment. I took these two pictures because the ranch I grew up on in DeVore, this is how we cut our wood. You see this? This is a blade. And I grew up working with we would hook this up to the rear end wheels of a car, and that'd be spinning, and you would just hand hold the wood as you fed it into that. And potentially very dangerous unless you know what you're doing. And so I said, I got to get a picture of that because that reminds me of my days out on the ranch. And this does too, because this is exactly like, with the exception, our tractor did not have this blade on it, but this is one of the tractors that was used in their ranching years. And that's almost exactly like the tractor we had on our ranch. And you used to see these handles. You have two brakes right here, and you have these two clutches. And when you want it to turn, you pull this clutch, and it disengages this track, so that only the other track is turning. And conversely, if you're trying to turn the other way, you pull this one. And if you really want to turn fast, you pull one of these and put on the brake at the same time. That stops this, so it's not going at all. And then one of these things will just turn really almost at 90 degrees, just like that. So I saw that, and I told Alex, I got to get pictures of this and this because it reminds me of my days out on the ranch. And then the final picture is just a couple shots. The first day we had sunshine. The rest of the time we had that marine layer, and we could hear seals barking down at the bottoms of these cliffs. We would be hiking up here. You can see one of the trails right up here, but you could hear them, but you couldn't see them. But it gives you an idea of what a rugged but beautiful, incredibly beautiful shoreline you have all the way around. These are two different spots on the island. So anyhow, that's just a quick overview, but we had such a wonderful time together on that. But the fascinating part for me that caught my imagination even before we went was the history. And it's right off the coast. If you can swim 25 miles, you don't even have to pay passage over to it. Coming back, we didn't see any whales and no dolphins. And it was just as well because we were freezing cold and we're kind of anxious to get to somewhere where it was a little bit warmer. But any questions or anything? What?
I want to commend your adventurous spirit. The fact that you can do these while you're still young.
Yeah. Thank you for that compliment. But it is,
How big is the island?
How big is the island? It's about 25 miles long at its longest spot. So it's roughly the same size as Catalina.
And
Yeah.
from whom did the government purchase the island?
From whom? Oh,
Who owned it before?
well, the ranchers settled it in about the 1850s, and the families ran sheep on it until about 1970, I think it was. And then the Nature Conservancy bought, and this is the other thing I really appreciated, they didn't just, declare whatever that is you can declare on public land. And they didn't do that. They bought it from the ranchers. And so they were honoring the ranchers, even though they knew there was a lot of destruction that happened to the wildlife. They honored the ranchers and bought the property from them. And then the national park bought the upper end, bought the eastern end of it, and did the same thing. They paid the families for the 100 years that they had farmed on that. And I really appreciated that because it showed respect for, even though they knew the damage that had happened to the wildlife and everything during that time, they didn't just dismiss that part of history. They honored it, and they honored the families enough to pay the money to buy the island in the 1970s, I think is when that took place. Good question. Yeah, back here.
But before that, you said the Chumash Indians were on that island.
Yes.
How were they moved, or the ranchers took their land?
It wasn't real. I wasn't really clear on when the Chumash moved. I did not get the sense that the ranchers drove them off. I think the Chumash had already migrated on to the mainland, but they still had places that they viewed as sacred lands. So the Chumash would still go out to the islands on occasion, but of course their lifestyle they had migrated inland, and most of the year they were on the inland. But it wasn't 100% clear to me exactly when the Chumash moved inland, but it was not. They were not driven off the island, from what I could tell. That's a good question. Anything else? Well, if you want, yeah, go ahead. Other than foxes. Oh, nobody permanently, except that the National Park Service, of course, has people that there are to care for it year round. And obviously in the times when people are coming over a lot, they increase the number of people, but there's nobody that lives there permanently on the island right now. And they don't want to do that. They want to keep it as a preserve but it was so much fun to see these foxes, I'll tell you.
one of the things that we noticed when we were hiking on the trails, I don't know if the foxes don't like to have their rear ends tickled or what, but they seemed to choose the trails to leave their piles on. So you were walking like this, being very careful where you stepped, because it made it look like there was a whole lot more than 300, 400 foxes that they say on there and walk. I thought, boy, if that's all the foxes they have still, they're awfully busy.
Eating tortillas.
Yeah. So one of the things that you know, when you're sleeping out like I do, when you're sleeping in a sleeping bag, you don't have a tent or anything, where do you change clothes? In your sleeping bag. Not an easy thing to do. So probably the most embarrassing moment for me was the restroom was close to a quarter mile from where we were sleeping. And in the middle of the night, sometimes my bladder says, hey, it's time. So I would sleep in my clothes so that I could just jump out and put on sandals and make it to the restroom fine. And that worked for about 2 nights. And about the 3rd night, I thought, you know, I haven't had to get up at all. So I think I'll not be quite as anxious about sleeping in my full clothing. Well, I got up and I had to put my boots on, had put my pants on, then put my boots on, and head for the bathroom. Didn't make it. So I came back and I was soaking wet. Fortunately, Alex is pretty forgiving, and there weren't too many other campers around to notice. But it's one of the hazards of being in your 80s and still trying to do crazy things. So, any other questions? Yes.
How did you get to the island from the mainland?
Well, you have to pay postage, and there's a company, I forget the name of it, but that you plan that you request. You have to make all these reservations in advance to make sure there's a campsite available and that there's boat passage over there. What? Did I say postage? Well, that's because I'm a male, and so I thought that they would mail me over there. No. It's not postage, it's passage. So they have ferries that go out there. They distinctly make their living off of that. Yeah, back there.
You said you grew up on a ranch. Where was the ranch?
The ranch that I grew up on was in Devore, which is in Cajon Pass. And it's about 2,500 feet elevation. And so we would, funny story, my dad wanted to move out from Chicago to get away from the snow. So in 1944, we moved to California, and I spent the first 4 years out here in Laverne. And then in 1948, we moved to the ranch. My dad always wanted to live on a ranch. And so my mom was so funny. She had a funny sense of humor. And so she would tell people that she didn't know much about ranching. Neither did my dad. Neither one of them knew much about farming and ranching. And my mom said, so when we got this place and the guy was showing us around, she said, well, how come that cow doesn't have horns? And Farmer Murhaus said, well, some cows don't have horns because they're born without them. And some cows don't have horns because we cut them off so that they're safer to work with. But that cow doesn't have horns because it's a horse. So that's about how much my mom grew up in Chicago, and I don't think she'd ever been farther away than sand dunes in Michigan.
I knew she had relatives in Michigan. I don't think my dad grew up in India and had been around the world 5 or 6 times by the time he was a teenager, and so they were quite a match. But neither one of them knew much about farming. So when we moved up to the ranch, it was quite a learning experience for all of us. But it was wonderful. I would not have traded a minute of it. You know, we had to heat our house in the wood stove, but that's the only heat we had in our house except for a small electric heater in the bathroom. And the rest of the house was heated by our wood stove. So I was responsible for running one of those saws, and my dad and I would cut the wood, and I was responsible for making sure there was wood in the house for us to keep the house warm with. But I would not trade those years that I lived on the ranch at all. Oh yeah, he wanted to get away from the snow. So anyhow, the first 4 years we lived in Laverne, moved to the ranch in 1948. Any of you lived in California in 1949, the winter of 49? What was it like? Snow. We were snowed in for 6 weeks. I mean, my dad could get out because he parked the truck about a quarter mile from the house where he could drive out. And so he would go to work by walking that way, but he had to haul all the groceries and all the feed and everything for a quarter mile by hand, because I was only 8 years old. I couldn't help him at all. But here he moved out here to get away from the snow, and then we had one of the worst snow winters that California has ever had. Okay, I got about 1 minute to 8, so if I'll take one more quickie question if you have one. Anyhow, I thank you all for coming, and it's been fun.
So there's a lot of goodies up here if you want to stick around and check out what John had on his back for I don't know how many days. And have a good evening. We'd like to thank Sean, Steve, and Joe for all their help in the back. And have a good rest of your evening. Good night.